of my Dvar Torah today, I do want to open it up as I like to and make it interactive. So we mentioned that we have the Shema in this Torah portion. We have the Ten Commandments in this Torah portion. And we also have one of the more controversial teachings in the Torah in this Torah portion. And I kind of compare it to a sleeping bear that's in hibernation. There are long periods of time when it kind of just lays dormant, like a bear during the winter. But it always kind of, something pricks it and it comes back to the fore. And that is this notion of the chosenness of the Jewish people. And most recently, it's been in the national headlines with regard to several nationalist groups, both white and black, in our country, who claim that they, not the Jewish people, are God's chosen people. So this past Thursday evening, after we had our minyan, I started this discussion, and I stopped in the middle so we could finish it today when we had some more people with us. And for those that were not with us Thursday night, were unable to, I'm just going to briefly review what we covered. So I first just want to look at one or two references from the Torah. The first is from the book of Exodus. And God says, if you will obey me faithfully and you will keep my covenant, you shall be my Am Segula Mikol Ha'amim, my treasured possession among all of the people or nations of the earth. Indeed, God says, all the earth is mine, but you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And then the second reference, as I said, is another reference is in today's Torah portion, Deuteronomy 7:6, page 1030. For you are an Am Kadosh, a holy people to the Lord your God. Of all the peoples on earth, the Lord your God chose you to be God's Am Segula, God's treasured people. So just briefly, I now want to, how these verses have been interpreted. I'll start in the Middle Ages. And there are a number of them. I'm just going to do one or two again. Rabbi Ovadia Sforno, the greatest of the Italian biblical commentators in the 15th century, he interprets the verses to mean, while all my human creatures are created in my image, says God, and are thus important to me, the Jewish people are the most important. And there are a number of those along the same lines. Judah Halevi, perhaps the greatest Jewish poet of the Middle Ages, he says the Jewish people are endowed with a divine influence. It's passed down genetically from generation to generation. And as a result of this, the Jewish people receive special divine providence and blessings that other peoples do not receive. I'm always emphasizing one of the richnesses of our traditions is that Judaism speaks stereophonically and not in one voice. So in the Middle Ages, it was mainly reading the biblical verses on their face. We're special, we're better than everyone else in God's eyes. But there are other interpretations. In the Talmud of all places, it states that the reason that God made us God's chosen people is because it was used as a restraint on us, because we're one of the fiercest people in the world. We needed this to calm us down a bit. In the prophets, because we're God's chosen people, we're going to get punished more harshly than others when we do wrong. And in fact, as I mentioned in Isaiah 53 Thursday night, we're going to be vicariously punished at times for the sins of other nations. So if we do wrong, never mind are we going to get punished for our own sins, but God's going to punish us for the sins of others. That's where I left off Thursday night. Then there's another opinions on these verses, and it changes the whole framework, and it says, well, in fact, God didn't choose us. We chose God. In the Midrash, Sifrei Deuteronomy, it says, God offered the Torah to all the nations of the world before offering it to the Jewish people. But the other nations of the world refused because of all the restrictions on immoral behavior. Only Israel agreed to accept and be bound by the Torah, and therefore we became God's chosen people. And in the Talmud it says that after being turned down by other nations of the world, at Mount Sinai, when God offered us the Torah, God wasn't sure that we were going to accept it. So what does God do? He holds Mount Sinai over our heads and threatens to crush the Israelites if they don't accept the Torah. So we've got all these different interpretations. What I wanted to do, and so let me ask, there was a question I think Howard Melhouse got a great answer for. Why in the Middle Ages do you think that the sages, the rabbis, interpreted these verses on their face and said, yes, we are the most special people to God? Why do you think they might have interpreted it that way in the Middle Ages? Good, Stuart.
Well, I would guess with everything that was going on in the Middle Ages, where the Jews were the center of much of the ill towards other peoples, that this was a way of them to return some self-pride and self-confidence in themselves.
Yeah, and it's funny, when I was growing up, it was Black Power. Black people were discriminated against, so Black Power was a way of restoring confidence. Stuart, I think that's exactly right. Middle Ages, the Jewish people were victims. Every country were expelled, the Spanish Inquisition, the Crusaders. And this was a way of the rabbis, sages saying, hey, we're pretty good. Despite all of these atrocities against us, have self-esteem. You're God's special people. So let's look at today, however. Here's the conservative movement's position. Few beliefs have been subject to as much misunderstanding as the chosen people doctrine. The Torah and the prophets clearly stated that this does not imply any innate Jewish superiority. The Torah teaches us that we are to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation with obligations and duties which flow from our willingness to accept this status. Far from being a license for a special privilege, it entails the taking on of additional responsibilities, not only toward God, but to our fellow human beings. It obligates us to build a just and compassionate society throughout the world. And that's from Emet V'Emunah, the statement of principles of the conservative movement. So anybody have any thoughts why the conservative movement would take that particular interpretation, apply that interpretation in the 20th, 21st century, that it's not, we're special, it just imposes more obligations on us and responsibilities that non-Jews don't have. Why do you think that in the 20th century, following up with Stuart's logic of the medieval days, the conservative movement takes that view?
I think we're, obviously at this point, we're not, while there still is a lot of anti-Semitism, we're not an oppressed people. But I also think it's critical that we not be guilty of hubris, exaggerated self-importance that invites retribution, especially now nowadays. I mean, to take a more to emphasize that we're not better than anyone else, I think is critical. You know, all people really are equal.
Is that what it's saying? No. Who else was? Someone else? Jill, did you speak, or you got to unmute if you're going to speak?
I'm not sure I have the right verbiage to say what I want to say. I don't think it's very easy to blame the victim, and we should never define ourselves through the eyes of other people who wish to define us. We should define ourselves. So it becomes an issue of how do we see ourselves in the society we're living in today. And we're not in a ghetto. We're not confined to a small space where we're only living among our own. So good relations with other people can be defined differently, but I think it's still important for us to define ourselves.
Okay. Rabbi Reuben Hamner, some of you may be familiar with him. He was the editor of a Siddur in 2003, Siddur Or Hadash. He's one of the leaders of the was one of the leaders of the Israeli conservative movement, the Masorti movement. And here's what he said. There's no inherent superiority in being Jewish, but we do assert superiority of monotheistic belief over paganism. I know it's believing in one God versus multiple gods. So does anybody see an inherent weakness, though, in both the conservative movement's interpretation and in Reuben Hamner's interpretation? Even though it's saying we're no better than anybody else, there is an implication.
That we're obligated to be better, in essence.
Yeah, and so
I think one thing's an ego. Well, I'm better than everybody else, and in this country right now, there are people who not necessarily Jewish people, but you know, there's a whole section of people who believe they are better than everybody else, and and they want to change. You know, they don't believe in equity. They don't believe in that stuff, and they believe that they are better. But I think there's a difference between the ego part of feeling better and the obligation part of you. You have an obligation to live in a higher standard, to really think morally and ethically about things. And that's one of the things I love, is that I have a responsibility, not just to myself and not just to my family, but to my community to make things better.
okay. Thank you, Batya. Anybody else want to give their opinion about it? Jeff Ty? No? So I think that the conservative movement and Reuben Hamner are doing the best they can to respond to a very provocative term. But while I say they're doing their best, let's say I'm a Christian, and you're telling me that you got a higher standard of responsibility than I have to be a righteous person and do good things in the world and to serve God. How am I going to respond to that?
You're going to respond that I think my religion obligates me to be a very moral and caring person. And in fact, it's not a unique responsibility to Jews. Everyone is equally obligated, and you know, to say that we're special, that we're obligated more so to be of high moral to show a high moral standard than other groups. It again invites you know, retribution, invites people to act against us as well.
And what about a Muslim? Oh, Jeff, yeah, thanks.
Can I just say something, Bill? I kind of don't agree with you. I once had an interesting conversation.
I'm leaving. Yeah.
No, we're going to just converse.
Yeah.
A coworker who grew up in a small town in one of the states in the middle of the country asked me one day, he said, "Why do people hate the Jews?" And I said, "You're asking me?" I said, I have no idea. You're the one who would have the information on why people would hate us. And he said to me, "Well, do you think it's because for a small segment of the American populations, Jews excel at so many things and that people are jealous?" And I said, "I have no idea." So I think, Bill, that's what you're trying to speak to, is that we don't want to make other people jealous of us. But I go back to what my father used to say: you live the best moral life you can and hopefully lead by example. And you can't control other people's thoughts. And I don't know if I have a limited view. I feel like I'm not expressing what I want to say correctly, but I don't want other people defining what non-Jews defining what a Jew should be and how we should live.
But I think for me to take pride in the fact that Jews represent, let's say, a disproportionate percentage of Nobel Prize winners is almost a form of racism. I haven't won a Nobel Prize, so I'm responsible for what I do. So if a Jewish person does something bad to someone, he doesn't therefore have a right to hate me. And I feel I don't have a right to take pride in the accomplishment of others. And I think all of this, whether they're Jewish or not, is, is something we have to be very conscious of, to be fair to others.
Thank you, Bill. Let me just move on for the sake of time. I think it's a very difficult issue. So Reuben Hamner again says, a very respected rabbi, there's no inherent superiority in being Jewish, but we do assert superiority of monotheistic belief over paganism. And again, here we're comparing ourselves to another group of people. And the fact is, the Hindu faith has thousands of gods. So does that mean we're superior to Hindus, which there are more Hindus in the world? We'll say there are a lot more. India is the largest country in the world. So are we superior to the Hindu faith? It gets us, it's a hard issue. And what I wanted to mention, as a result, Mordecai Kaplan, who was a conservative Jew, went to JTS and started the Reconstructionist movement. And that was one of the reasons he started it. The Reconstructionist movement has eliminated the phrase chosen people from its theology and its lexicon. He says it's inconsistent with the civil status of the modern Jew. It is a barrier to self-identification with the country in which one lives. He says the term is unethical, keeping alive the idea of race or national superiority. He says the term fosters tensions between us Jews and other faith traditions, as well as secular people. No answers, that's Judaism. Lots of questions. And so I came up with 6 different responses one can make to it from our tradition, just from our tradition. We are better than everybody else. Well, some of the rabbis said we're worse than everybody else. And others say we have more responsibilities than everybody else. And what some of my Bible professors would have said in rabbinical school is humans crafted that, and humans wanted to use the Bible as a proselytizing document. And if you want to bring people into your faith tradition, you tell everybody you're better than everybody else. God loves you more. I don't have an answer. I don't think there is one good answer. And I think that our tradition has done the best that it can. Just wanted to point out what a provocative statement it is. When you start comparing yourself, it's inherently provocative. Rather than just saying, we have a special relationship with God, we have a covenant, it imposes certain responsibilities on us. But do we also recognize maybe that Christians have a covenant with God, and Muslims have a covenant with God, and Hindus have a covenant with all their gods and all the different faith traditions? So anyone have a last word or two? I don't.
I just think we need to abandon all of that.
And that's what the Reconstructionist movement has done.
Right. Because it's inherently self-serving, and you know, it's not race per se, but it is, in the broader sense, a type of trying to figure out, to find meaning in our lives. And, you know, we can work hard to do good things, and we can also become better than others by saying we're chosen, we're special. I think it's, although I love to do it too, I feel it's self-indulgent.
Okay. Anybody just to close want to take the contrary view? That's what our tradition's all about, and I urge that all the time. I wish we did it. I'm always saying in our culture today, there's truth to everything. Some truth, some have more truth than others. There's very few absolutes in the world. Slavery being one of them for me. But anybody take the other side that there's a, you know, whatever it is. Jill, I think you were taking another position.
I like to view it as different, uses the term different, and that different religions or different ways of life have a different approach to how we get through the challenges of life. And in a sense, that is what religion is supposed to be, sort of a guidebook to help us get through life's trials and tribulations, as well as to celebrate the joys. And there's different ways to do it.
So
and Judaism is one of the ways to do it. And that doesn't mean you're better than Islam. You're just a different path.
Jeff Ty, come on, you gotta have a comment. That's not the Jeff Ty I know.
I was just thinking as all the explanations were coming across, maybe an analogy to, you know, like a family with several kids, and the parents start with the first kid, and by the time they get to the third or fourth kid, their rules and regulations have kind of relaxed a lot over the years. And I kind of see it as they still hold the older child to hopefully set a good example for his or her brothers and sisters. And by setting that example, hopefully the younger kids will pick up on some of the things that the older child has done or is doing, and maybe they will emulate those ways so that they too can be as good as their older sibling. And I kind of see that, not that that the older child is better. The older child may have had maybe a little bit more experience with certain things and has gained some knowledge along the way and has tried to hopefully put it into practice. So I see it more as setting example so that others will pick up on that example, but everybody is essentially held to the same standard.
A brilliant midrash, Jeff. That's just excellent. Very good. The only, and I think the countervailing issue is that the Christian texts say that their covenant has replaced our covenant. And the Muslim Quran says that their covenant has replaced both of those covenants because it's the most recent one, and that God has entered into with the Muslim faith the most recently, so it's the best of the covenants. Controversial, that was just a brilliant approach though, Jeff. And again, I just want to emphasize, that is the beauty of the Jewish tradition. Instead of just saying this is the right way and this is the wrong way, our tradition encourages us to dig deeper and to keep peeling layers off the onion. It's Hillel and Shammai. We turn to page 183. Lena